I do think most people still believe in Santa Claus. That comes through in a quiet frustration when things are unfair. You'll catch them and they'll be thinking, I wish it wasn't like this. You see this when they're under pressure. So if you want to find out how mature somebody is, go and see them on their worst day and rock in with a pack of biscuits and ask if they're ready for if they'd like to have a cup of tea.
Why is it that some people never change, David? What are they resisting, in your words? What's going on for them?
Where I've got to is it all comes down to maturity. There's so many layers to that word and the conversation that comes off that. So really what I've got to now is the difference between phenomenal and terrible is all maturity. And then sadly most people settle for average because that's the safest place to sit. And then I'll say to people, when was the last time you took your fare out for coffee? And they're like,
what do you mean? They don't want to have that conversation.
No, they don't want to take their fare for coffee. They want to go and find any way they can to get it out of themselves and extinguish it and basically kill it. They see it as their worst enemy, not their best friend. But ironically, you put fear as your worst enemy, and your life's it's going to be pretty difficult.
With Lisa or people like that, or the Sevens team or the Olympian team, what are you teaching those amazing athletes how to handle these high pressure situations? As a mind coach, what are you doing with them? Okay, team, this week, very lucky again to have a very, very kind and generous fellow by the name of David Galbraith, aka DG. I shouldn't say DJ unless he does that nightlife.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't be. There wouldn't be much of a party. He's
a sheep beef farmer from King Country as well, to boot. But David is best known. He's kind of I think he's been called the ghost in the machine. We've been doing some research on him, but he's a mind coach. So he's a clinical psychologist, and we're going to get into that. So he's a registered clinical psychologist, and he's a renowned performance coach. So he's been working in the high performance sports arena for over 20 years. He's worked with Jamie Joseph, Wayne Smith at the Chiefs. He's worked with the Brave Blossoms, 2 Rugby World Cup campaigns, getting that team to the quarterfinals. He's also worked with top Olympians like Lisa Carrington, Sarah Walker, and many, many others. He's got a lot of credentials to name, and we're very lucky to have him on the show. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, St. John.
Now, we're going to get straight into it, David. You spent years before, I understand, for working with high-performance athletes that we just rolled off, with some serious criminal offenders before teaching high-performance and mental skills in elite sport. So what I want to know is, what did that teach you about human behaviour that you haven't learned in the locker room?
Yeah, it's a great question to start with, isn't it? It drops us straight into the deeper layers of psychology and humanity. Working with that particular space of humanity opens you up straight away to work with the shadow. And, I guess we live in a world where we're very fortunate to live day by day in a way which is, obviously there's some edges to life for sure, and there always have been, and sadly there seem to be more edges in life today, even in our common communities, which is sad with the way I guess some people are struggling. But certainly that most people aren't in their lives probably required to look at the shadow of humanity. We know we get on with things and life goes pretty well, and I guess COVID and the current situation in the Middle East in recent times has shown us that that's not a given, and so we probably do appreciate our safety more than we have in our health. But certainly most people in their lives aren't asked to look at the darkness of humanity, and that period of my time in my career asked me to do that and to be in that very deeply. And ironically, it's probably the depth of the work I do with people now is founded or grounded in that time. And, it's a funny way to say it, but there's a shadow in all of us, and there's a darkness in all of us.
The shadow self, Carl Jung.
Yeah, and yet, unfortunately, most people aren't given an opportunity to grow to understand that and have a shame attached to the darkness. And unless you've had the freedom to be in an environment which talks openly about the darkness and the shadow and in a way that sees it as an opportunity to grow ourselves. And then when you're working in the space that I grew, I guess my first competency as a psychologist, we were required to do that. So you had to do that in a way that if you didn't, then people were going to get hurt. So We were required to go deep into the shadow of these people and help them understand that, and do our best to try and find a way to help them find a new way. The irony is that foundation probably separates out a lot of what I do these days now from maybe others that are in the same domain, because of the depth of that work and that space of helping people understand the shadow and their darkness, and then allows people that I connect with to do the same, to find a freedom from it, plus an ally in it, to understand energy and to be able to use the very thing that for most people sadly becomes a prison or a trap that holds them for their lives, and they do their best to fight it or to hide it from shame, and really struggle in that space quite in a lonely way. What I guess I did with where I started was find a new way.
Yeah. Which
isn't a new way, it's an old way of time, but only if you understand and spend time in that space. And you mentioned Carl Jung before, and I was just lucky to spend time, becoming deeply educated in a domain that required us to look at those particular thinkers, and then have that as a reference point for how we thought about and embraced humanity in our day-to-day lives. So I look back now and feel a lot of gratitude that I got to spend time with some amazing people in those places and spaces. And it's ironic because it was both with offenders, but also with the police and child, youth and family, with our parents that unfortunately hurt children.
Yep.
And so working within that space, the child abuse team, and also within the offenders within the criminal system, it slows you down pretty quick. And makes you appreciate the conversations you have with people and what you're trying to achieve. And then that's something that now has a great, it seems quite unusual to say it, but I miss it. I miss that rawness. And some days I find myself sitting on top of the hills in the King Country with Colin Meads, contemplating life and whatnot, and I find myself just quietly thinking, that's something I might, I don't think I will go back and spend time in that space, but certainly helping people with their own shadows now, and obviously the rural sector's become something which has always been home to me, and one that, for me, I'm very well immersed in with the farm. Just having that background helps me have conversations with mates over the fence, it's what most people find uncomfortable to talk about. I'm encouraging people to find some comfort in talking about and not to be afraid of, and not to feel ashamed about. It's all, all those particular dark shadows that sit within humanity are all part of us. And it's the day we stop fighting it, the day that we find freedom. And sadly, we don't grow up in a culture that encourages us to make it a normal part of conversation. In fact, it's the very opposite, encourages us to see it as a pathology and a problem and something that needs to be shut down. And then sadly, you can't shut down one dimension of emotional space without shutting everything down. So we have a lot of people that try and fight that area and unfortunately feel quite flat in life in general. So that beginning and origin, I look back on with a lot of fond memories and amazing people, and a lot of thanks for how I operate today, both of myself as a parent and a son and a friend, and obviously within the professional space. So it was a beginning I'd wish all psychologists would have to help them just get that founding.
Yeah, sounds like a very, you use the word founding there, a very strong grounding and foundational part of your life. Absolutely. So tell me, we've done a little bit of research on you, and I understand that it took you 15 goes or attempts to become a clinical psychologist. Can you tell us about that?
Well, there's 5 universities in New Zealand, and they all offer a clinical postgraduate diploma. So you do your undergrad, you do your master's, and then you go to a 3-year specialised training. And there's 5 of those programs. And so when I was going my mother for some, I think it's all about, like it is, Einstein said that it's all about energy, and it just seemed to be an energy that kept drawing me towards psychology. It wasn't a cognitive intention to go, that's where I was going to end up. It was really, I got to the end of my undergraduate at Ilam and Christchurch and had no idea, absolutely no idea what I was going to do. And then, as life has it, you just sort of, moments come along and you make decisions. In that moment, I'm on a bit of gut feel, and I carried on, and I took a year off and worked up in the Yukon for a while to get some space. So that was a moment of time too, where I had a very open and freedom opportunity that probably helped make a decision. So I came back and did my master's, and then as soon as you start doing masters in psychology, people are talking about the clinical program. It's considered the place to be if you're just steeped in that tradition. And so it made me curious about whether I could be, I could get into that program. And my grades weren't very good. They were poor. They were C- in my undergraduate, and in psychology, that's not particularly good.
I thought to jump in. I thought C's make degrees, but I know.
Yeah, well, that's what I appreciate that. I love that quote. Unfortunately, it certainly needs to be academically. You need to have a stronger history, and so through my masters, I applied every year while I was doing my masters. So every university, so 5 universities a year for 3 years, and everyone replied except the very last one, which was Auckland, in my 15th application. So there wasn't 15 times the same program. It was 15 applications across 5 universities across 3 years, and each one said, thanks very much for your interest, but unfortunately you haven't made our first selection criteria, which is your academic history, which was basically saying, sorry, you're not, we're thick. That's the way I giggled about it, which is
we could cognitively reappraise that, David.
Yeah, I love the idea now of life smart versus academically smart.
Yes, totally. Books are like now. Let me ask you another question, because I've got to pepper a few questions here to really unpack things a bit more, if you can. So you talked about the energy and this drawing you towards it, and we've read about you, and we're talking about courage and the handbrake and all these kind of concepts, cake and icing and all this sort of stuff. But what was it that drew you? What was that energy about that drew you to get curious about human behavior and psychology? What was it that drew you towards that discipline, that domain?
It felt early on I had it's hard to describe it. Like, I think the energy is the right thing. Where I ended up in Auckland, when I went through to Auckland to do my last part of the training, when I was accepted onto that program up there, I very quickly became involved in a community treatment centre for serious offenders. In my first year of the clinical training, and spent 3 years working with them, or actually longer than that, because I stayed on after I'd graduated and registered. But there was a very powerful energy I had with working with men and young men who were very dangerous men, and left a trail of damage behind them. So there was just something about that work that I found incredibly challenging and rewarding. And I saw men that had very difficult upbringings themselves, usually, find some incredible courage to try and change a legacy of violence and hurting people. And that leaves you pretty humbled yourself when you see men and young men try and defy multiple generations of violence, and make a change and make something different of their lives for their legacy, despite what they'd been gifted, and sadly so, from many years within their own upbringing. So I found it incredibly powerful, St. John, and then that I think for me was something I loved doing, is seeing people and try them, to do them possible and to be very real. So there was something about the realness of that. And, I do struggle in life now with people that aren't prepared to be real. The superficial nature of conversations I'm happy to do for people, but I don't spend much time now in communities and spaces where people aren't prepared to have a coffee and really get stuck into a good chat. Yeah, and time for me was really highlighted back then about how precious it is. These people, they were on a pretty tight timeline. They needed to make some significant change pretty quickly, because the amount of support they had to do that was time limited. And I always knew that as soon as they stepped back into the environment that they'd come from, if they didn't have the fitness, their psychological fitness to be able to, operate in that space, it's a very powerful socialization to go back to the shadow, in the wrong way. So I really felt drawn to it. I love seeing people strive to achieve something that most people told them they couldn't do. And it really taught me, it felt like it was teaching me very important lessons about how to help people find potential. So I was sparked by the magnitude of humanity that sat in that space, and just the lessons it gave me that felt like it was probably far better training than 8 years at university training in psychology. That was where I really learnt. I believe how I am today was from that training. That's your education sets up the possibility of finding these depths, but it's not until you've had the experiences. And I was just very lucky to be around some amazing people like Nigel Latter and we know well-known young, man that I met as a young man, and sadly he's passed. So, you can't help but be around people like that and understand the world very differently than you did. So that was the draw, and it's always stayed there. And I find myself today, I love the idea of farming and farm with my dad, and he's got a philosophy which has been a little bit better this year than last year. And we flow with the schedule. The schedule is our secondary focus. The first focus is to grow great grass and see what our animals can do. So I love that same feeling with him, as we're every day we're living to be the best we can and find that little bit of magic. And I think that came from the shadow too, the appreciation for the breath, the appreciation for life, and it's been profound, and that sits deeply there.
Yeah. So very real, very raw there. People might say, oh, this is a bit of a sort of, dark subject to start on, but, talked about the shadow self and some of these young or men that have come from dysfunctional families, multi-generational violence, and having a breakthrough. And I know you're very well known for this concept of courage, which you don't trademark. But let's move to the high sports, elite sports area, which you've operated in for the last 2 decades. You've worked with New Zealand Olympic team, Olympian athletes. I think you've got about 12 gold medals, not you personally, but you've been involved in that as that mind coach. And I suppose when you look and study human performance at the very highest level, why is it that some people never change, David, even though they know they need to do something to change? Like, what are they resisting, in your words? What's going on for them?
Yeah, it's a great question too, St. John. It's something, obviously, when you do this every day, that's the question.
It is always I have it in my own. It's like, we show you the way. Here's the toolbox. You've just got to walk through the door, but they resist it. They hold back, and fear of failure, whatever it is. But I'm more interested in your answer.
Where I've got to is it all comes down to maturity. And there's so many layers to that word and the conversation that comes off that. But this is nothing about whether people are good people or not. It's this. Most people I interact with are lovely people. They really are. But I say this with the most compassion and endearment, with knowing myself and my own maturity. So it's not something I sit up on a high tower with, for sure. But sadly, I do think most people still believe in Santa Claus, and that comes through in a quiet frustration when things are unfair. And you'll catch them and they'll be thinking, I wish it wasn't like this, or I wish it was easier, or if only, or they'll look at other people and go, oh, lucky bugger. So they'll have this layer of psychology going on, which you can then break down and think, well, if that's the thinking that's going on, you can start to think where they are developmentally. And again, it's nothing about them as people, but you see this when they're under pressure. So if you want to find out how mature somebody is, go and see them on their worst day and rock in with a pack of biscuits and ask if they're ready for if they'd like to have a cup of tea. And so how people operate when things are not going well and they are under pump from multiple dimensions, that is the time we get an MRI of our psychological maturity. Sadly, our system isn't set up in a way to grow psychological maturity. Our education's set up in a way to develop obedience. And at the moment, the mental health stats in our teenagers shows us our education system's failing miserably. And it's no surprise, because it's moved more and more away from supporting young people to grow up into young people to understand how to fit boxes to get points to pass NCEA or whatever it was. And sadly, for the last, I think there's some different views now. I think we're finding a shift in the way that people talk about it. But the old school that you and I grew up with is very different from the schooling system for the last 2 decades. And I can give you a great example to help people understand what I mean. Is, well, when you and I were at school, the jungle bars had concrete or limestone underneath. And we used to play marbles. Used to be like a high elite sport at primary school when I went to a little country primary school. But that school had limestone underneath the jungle bars, and those bars were easily 2 metres off the ground. But I don't remember one broken arm. And now, those areas underneath jungle gyms have to be 500 mils at least bark deep, and that has to be refreshed and shown in the health and safety plan and the main office that's been replaced and blah-de-blah. And then they stop bull rush and they stop tree climbing and, peanut butter at school and those sorts of things. So you can see how people's intentions are right, but what they're actually doing is they're dumbing down the opportunity for children to grow up. And then teachers started patrolling the playgrounds, and so staff breaks at morning tea and afternoon tea and lunchtimes became rostered on into the classroom or into the playground. And I'm like, well, what are you doing in the playground? Well, I need to stop fights. And I'm like, what do you mean you need to stop fights? But you see how, again, people's need to feel safe and a movement towards, I guess, maybe over-managing our children from the best intentions, because I don't want to see people get hurt. But ironically, it was that ability to stand up for yourself in the playground and for kids to sort out a social network and a social structure to take care of the bully and those sorts of things, and have a few fist fights to sort things out in the playground, then play a bit of bull rush and a bit of rugby and rip a shirt, and then learn they've got to take a spare shirt to school because otherwise upset mum when they get home, and you don't want to do that because then you upset dad, and you need to make sure you don't do that. So the whole system moved very much from 4 or 5 teaching children to be very competent at lots of chores and skills and contribution, to 7, 8 to be free to go out on your bikes with your mates and be back by tea time, or over the farm, Earling or whatever, and back by tea time between 7 and 12. Like, I think today, if you had a 7 to 12-year-old doing those sorts of things, there'd be neighbours or people on the street that would be, probably making some phone calls to check those parents out. But the irony is those parents are helping their children develop powerful skills for maturity. So you can see how you can sort of look at that and see what's happened in our social system, and the education system then has had a profound impact on our psychological system. And so we've got people in adult bodies doing adult things and having families and creating great lives and being good people. But under moments of distress and duress and pressure, we see a lot of people fragment and fall apart. And elite sport and high-performance sport merely gives us those moments of pressure regularly, and it's all seen on TV and it's all on video and feedback, and so people can't hide. So really what I've got to now is the difference between phenomenal and terrible is all maturity, and then sadly most people settle for average because that's the safest place to sit, is that you don't ever have periods of pressure, and you don't have periods of maybe losing it all because you want to sit on a 7% interest rate or lower. You want a 30-year mortgage. You want a partner who's earning a bit of coin as well, so you've got double income, and hopefully you get to pick up a cheap batch that someone doesn't want and a place hasn't been found yet, and then you start to stress out about what Donald Trump's up to each day, or you start to panic about the virus out of Wuhan or whatever it might be, but all of a sudden you start to see your life fall apart, and then you feed off people that fall apart around you, and all of a sudden you're part of a community of people that are petrified. But still good people, but it's all maturity, right? And the maturity gives us the perspective. It allows us to sit comfortably with our perspective of a context. And Viktor Frankl said it beautifully. He said that the space between the stimulus and the response is choice. That's freedom. The freedom to choose. And so I get goosebumpy because he was talking about the same thing. He said in between the space of the stimulus and response is maturity. The degree of maturity allows you to consider your perspective, even if it's a short amount of time, but you get to choose your response. And then the consequence in his particular case was a difficult one because it wasn't in his power, but his mind was always in his power.
Yeah, I mean, I want to jump in there, not rudely, but remind people, A Man's Search for Meaning is a beautiful, beautiful
book. It's a fantastic book.
Referring to Viktor Frankl, he's an Auschwitz survivor. I think he was in logotherapy, wasn't he?
That's right.
He, his almost his stoicism, but his ability to train his mind in incredibly harsh circumstances. And I think the only thing that gave him hope from my memory, which might fail me, is he wrote little pieces of his lecture and put them in his jacket as he was around Auschwitz. And his whole hope was that he was going to be able to get out and lecture and teach people and serve. So it's a beautiful book. David, sorry for me jumping over.
No, it's one of those books that
it's a seminal book which I think everyone should read. Now, let's move on to this. We've gone pretty deep, which I knew we would with you. And I love what you talked about an MRI of psychological maturity. And maybe, and you're being very, very polite there, very kind, very diplomatic. the mollycoddling, my words, not yours, where we are maybe impeding the maturity. We're walking around in adult bodies. We won't get generational and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, you've got on the world stage, on the sporting stage, you rightly said that there's no hiding. That is the ultimate test of pressure cooker situations, whether it's Sarah Walker, BMX, or it's Lisa Carrington, who's our most awarded, you know, Olympian. I mean, she's won so many freaking gold medals, it's unfunny, and rightly so. But like with Lisa or people like that, or the Sevens team or the Olympian team, could you just give us an insight into what you do with them and how you help them? I know we haven't got all day, but just some little insights and nuggets. Like, what are you teaching those amazing athletes how to handle these high pressure situations as a mind coach? What are you doing with them?
It's all done before they get there. That's, I think, a really important thing. Is the moment of performance isn't one where you can, you know, you're either ready or you're not. So if you're not ready before the moment of performance, you know, you don't find performance. Even the ones that you find as surprise results still have a background where you can see how they've got to that moment to be able to perform. And so I think that's a really important thing for people, is to understand that these people that are very successful, whatever the discipline and whatever dimension we're talking about, is they're people that have applied their lives to doing what they're doing. And so there is no luck. This is no such thing as luck. The layers that I look at for people is, if we're thinking maturity, the first part of that equation is identity. And so, you know, as funny as it sounds, you know, if I was able to change the education system from this week, I'd make the old third form a year that didn't have any academic. I'd take out all the academics, because we know from research that what people are like at 18, 19-year-olds isn't influenced by that 1 year. You can lose that year and still have people be extraordinarily academically fit at 18, 19. But I would introduce a year where the class stays the same, ideally if they could, for, you know, a good chunk of time through school. But that first year, it's all about who they are, and recognising that they all arrived in the country somewhere, and to share that story with each other and go and visit their place that their families landed, and to respect and understand each other's culture and really get deep within what that story meant about the people that had been before them, and, you know, the courage and sacrifice that all those people had made. And then that would be the first part of it. And then the second part would be, the year would be filled with community service. So they would be in the community as a school, classroom, helping the community make a difference for the whole year together. And then at the end of the year, they would do some stuff with the school about what was academically possible. And then they'd sit down with their family and plan out the 4 years that was left. I think that would have a profound impact on our education system. You know, if the primary school set them up to be cool kids and let them play, as well as establish the foundations to counting and reading like we need. That's for me, the curriculum isn't the problem, it's the way that we do the curriculum. So the first layer of that equation is, if I'm getting to sit with people, is who are they? That's number one. And now that's a very deep conversation of ancestry, as much as they know their parents, as much as they know their history, as much as they know the stories from uncles and aunties and mentors and coaches. So that's people who are living and people that are dead and past. And because this is the crazy thing, is we don't need to find out who we are. It's all there. We just need to slow down and listen, and it's all in that those stories. We'll find resonance, and then within that resonance, we find ourselves. And it all, you know, people that you can guarantee when you sit down and have a coffee with them, there'll be movies, or there'll be stories, or there'll be things that move them to tears that they didn't realise or couldn't understand why. Or they get goosebumpy when they hear a national anthem, or, you know, whatever it might be, or watch something or hear something of the homeland, or where they've come from, or from their people. So that's the first bit, is who are they? And then the second bit for me is, so what do you want? What do you actually want? And then that one's a powerful conversation, because it's not until you know who you are that you can quieten down and break free from the socialization of delivering what you think people want you to want. And most people live out someone else's want, and that's the reality of it.
Often mum and dad's.
Yeah. And then often they'll live out a reality which is safety first, conservative and careful, and have the greatest chance of succeeding and no chance of failing. And that comes down to who they marry and what they do for a job and where they live and what they aspire to.
30-year mortgage. Yep.
That's right. So all those stories fit off that I think at the depth of degree of, I guess, maturity and the identity of who they are and the quietness that they can find in that space. And then you can see how when you have that set up, you're already starting to work towards a very powerful foundation that's going to then come through as habits and the way that people operate. So I go identity, then I go, what do you want? And then I go, okay, so prove it. And then the proving it is, well, what's the plan? And then the difference between courage and stupidity, as long as I've been looking at this as a plan. There are many people who say they've got a plan. I ask them, so can you step me through your plan? And then there's silence. So they don't actually have a dream, they have a fantasy. And they don't, we know the difference, for me, it's the difference between fantasy and a dream as a plan. And so most people have fantasies that will never occur because they haven't got a plan. And if they haven't got a plan, then they're going to be operating from what I call the unconscious fear space, which is always the limbic system, making sure that you're doing things which step you away from pressure and just keep the homeostasis of the psychology system balanced, which is calm and peaceful and quiet. But we know, everyone knows that growth and anything of worth requires we're sitting in tension and pressure and challenge and not knowing what the outcome's going to be and requiring we invest anyway. And so you can start to see how if we're living from the fear system, you're never going to step and stay long enough in a place to actually figure anything out or to layer in any sort of accomplishment. So nothing, you'll then stay average, which is how that starts to work. So within there, you've got identity, who you are, and what's the plan, and then essentially the plan becomes integrity lived, which is the proving it bit. And so when people can find that space, when they're pure in the identity, they are clearly doing what they love, and they've got a world-class plan. The irony, St. John, is that they're going to get pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Because they automatically separate themselves out from probably maybe 75% of the population.
Yeah,
and then
you talked about that. Sorry, I just had to.
Yeah,
I was
jump
watching the LinkedIn articles because it's. I love where we're going with this. Is you said something very, very delightful, which is around the difference between terrible and phenomenal. So what you're talking is at the phenomenal scale, the bell curve of the potential thing you write about.
Yeah,
and like the habits, the routines, the rituals, and was it Andrew Carnegie Hall, still magnate. He said, I don't watch what men say, I watch what they do.
Yeah.
So, it's like everyone's got a plan or a goal, but yet it's a fantasy and it's only a dream when you've actually got a plan. And I love that. So tell me more around the integrity lived. Let's get into that.
So the integrity lived it's a great term. Yeah, great term. And the integrity lived for me is where the maturity takes shape. So that's where you'll start to see. Because integrity lived is easy when it's sunny and everything's going well and the interest rates are 3% or less and the global economy is on fire and everyone wants what you've got. It's when it goes the other way. That's when you really want to see people. But that's where integrity lived for me is, I just talk about the 8 critical decisions. There just seems to be that, there's a few decisions. I just come up with 8 because I kept coming up with decisions and coming up with decisions. I thought, I'll find the best 3, and then there's more than that, so there's 5, and then there's 8, and they'll have the number 7, and they'll have the number 9, so I just keep playing with those numbers. And the integrity lived requires maturity, and maturity requires that we've made some conscious decisions about how we want to live our life. And that's the difference, I believe, between the phenomenal and the terrible, is that the phenomenal have decided that they actually want to find out what they're capable of. And, you can go back to Ed Hillary's story. That was very clear when he answered the question, why are you doing this, Ed? Every scientist believes you're going to die. And he said, in just a brief summary of that transcript, he said, I guess we'll find out, won't we?
Yeah, beautiful.
So it's a beautiful, beautiful principle of courage right there. So you can see what he was, what was governing his psychology. And so you can see how within the space of integrity lived is we first have to have maturity to be able to sit quietly with the power of the responsibility to live to integrity, because that's a huge self-responsibility. It's not one of accountability and asking people to do it for us. It's something that's internal. It's something that becomes something, really that is as important as our own breath. And then you can see that in these people that are extremely disciplined and, stick at something for 16 years, and that's where you really start to see the difference, is the way they bring themselves to the basics every day is really quite outstanding. As you said before about we watch what they do, well, they do that. And so Integrity lived is to be able to repeat the same things that need to be done at a very basic level for many years. That requires deep maturity because it requires the maturity not to get distracted and to stay with the failures.
Distracted in this world. There's so many shiny things.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the essence of maturity and how we break that down really helps people, and people can do that from just listening to this. I'll just talk through a couple of those so that people will start to understand it. So many people actually haven't sat down and had that conversation with themselves about making a serious decision that they want to find out what they've got. They haven't. They're just really comfortable. They're operating unconsciously. It's all reactive. They haven't really got a plan. They just managed to get through from pay to pay, and each month's a struggle. So they haven't made any sorts of decisions about, bugger this, I want to break free of these chains. And so there's something about that quiet decision to go, enough's enough, right? And now that decision then sets up an opportunity to go, okay, how am I going to do that? And then the decisions that sit under that is straight away you've got to make a conscious decision that means I'm going to have to be different. I'm going to have to be brave. I'm going to have to be courageous. And we know that the courage, we know from neuroscience that courage is a neurological mediator between panic and composure. And that's that's not my words. They're from just a couple of articles that really educated me well on how the neuroscientist looks at this. And so all the studies show that when someone has a courageous perspective, the amygdala and the area around the limbic system fires differently than when they haven't. And so without a courageous perspective, all we've got is a very hot amygdala system, and we've got people who are panicking. And that's essentially how that system works. It's high energy. It's all about survival. It's all about what would be seen as irrational, extreme, in some ways psychotic thinking. It's out of control thinking. It's panic thinking. Full stop. So if you haven't got courage, then when you hit a pressure spot or you have the challenges start to come, one, you might get okay with one, but then the second one comes, and then now you're really into the pump, and then the third challenge comes, and you've got all sorts of things happening. The diesel price then hits almost $4 a litre, and all of a sudden we've got people popping all over the place because at the depth of it, they've met a place where their fear system has just gone out of control, but they've got no courage to hold it in synergy or harmony. So you can see how without the commitment to be brave, to live from courage, even to start to think I'm going to be brave is a change in our mindset. And so there's got to be a decision that I'm going to create a life and live a life which is based on courage. And then that obviously has, they just can't think it, but it's a start. It's a decision to be that way because that changes
in your thinking.
That's right, totally. And so that's the first decision. And then ironically off that, and again, it might sound incredibly simple to people, but when you slow down and start to look at it, without courage, you can't make and have a commitment to be yourself. And as we go, identity, who are you? Identity without courage means that you never tap into that, and you'll always be a pretend. You'll be someone who's pretending all over the show and is always edited. And so the importance to go, well, I need to first be brave, to then be myself. And then it's just a quiet conversation, as I don't have to be perfect at anything. Full stop. You just don't. Ironically, I heard a stat once that the most Olympic records or most Olympic gold medals are won in a time that's potentially the slowest that year. It's just because of the pressure in that place. Obviously, there's some real sparkers as well, so that happens there too. But in general, the gutsiest people win the gold medals because it's just so incredibly difficult in Olympic Games to perform because it's the pressure.
Yeah.
And so that whole sense of get over yourself and get over trying to be perfect, just be yourself and do what you love. And then already you're starting to create that there is a very powerful concoction, is you just being authentic, doing what you love, roll over and wake up next to the person you love. You're already creating a life which is phenomenal. Like that, sadly, is so rare. And most people do a job because it does guarantee the security that they're looking for outside themselves, and then that becomes the illusion that they hold on to like an addiction. So you go, decision to be brave, or sets us up for us to then allow ourselves to be ourselves, and then off that, as soon as we touch in there, we're free then to make the decision to make fear our friend. And then I'll say to people, when was the last time you took your fear out for coffee? And they're like, they don't want to take it. They don't want to have
that conversation.
No, they don't want to take their fear for coffee. They want to go and find any way they can to get it out of themselves and extinguish it and basically kill it. And so they see it as their worst enemy, not their best friend. But ironically, you put fear as your worst enemy, and your life's, it's going to be pretty difficult.
Yeah.
And that's, it's not that fear's doing that at all. It's just the sadness of it. But it's all about energy. It's out of control energy. And so when you can have a mindset to live brave, be yourself, okay, so I can then go and sit down with myself and put up a cushion on the side and put a picture on there and go, nice to meet you, David. And then have a sip of coffee and tell me a little bit about yourself. And then we can come into what's our fears and insecurities. We can look at them differently, and we can see the bad habits that are the slaves of those fears. And that's the key thing for people, is they spend their lives trying to stop bad habits, but the bad habit isn't the issue, it's the smoke screen. There's actually the fear that sits underneath that, and the bad habit's designed in a way to help look after us, to try and stop the fear and the perceived or anticipated terrible outcome from happening.
It's symptomatic versus root cause.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and so most people procrastinate because they're petrified of failing. It's not the procrastination.
Or the fear of failure, or ridicule, or embarrassment.
Right. That's right. Exactly. Yeah. Right? Exactly. Yeah. And so the bad habit becomes the best friend then, because it's looking after them. But it's
a protection mechanism, because from an ancestral path, our sense of belonging, our rank, assets, resources, kicked out of the cave, sense of belonging, all those kind of things.
That's right. Totally. So you can sort of see how by having those three layers in place, we're already starting to tap what the Japanese call mushin, which is quiet mind and peaceful soul. Another term I heard that describes it really beautifully is quiet water, peaceful water. And so you can see how those three decisions, if we sat with them and went, okay, I'm deciding to live my life courageously, that changes how our conversations happen straight away. If this is an integrity-based thing, an identity-based thing, and if it means that I'm just going to have to be myself, okay, now that starts the whole conversation differently than ever before. Who am I? What do I want? I'm just going to be that guy. And then thirdly, I'm not going to be someone that feels ashamed of my cracks and my shadow and my fears and my insecurities. I'm actually going to be someone that looks after them, gets to understand them, thanks them for their time for looking after me, because the way that I try and help people understand is fear is merely a motivation to create a good life through playing not to lose. So it's you still want a good life, but you don't want to fail. You don't want to make mistakes. You don't want to be judged. You don't want to be sent off with a red card. So you play carefully and conservatively. And if you think of a sports team that's playing from a motivation or a game plan not to lose, it looks very different from a team that's playing to win. And so I go, Jedi Green, Life Force plays to win. They're like, just make the shot, man. And then whereas Darth Vader sits up there and goes, oh, just wait a little bit longer until someone makes a mistake, and then we might get an opportunity, and then the referee might, and then it's playing not to lose. So you can really start to see that the fears is playing not to lose. It still wants you to have a good life, but a different pathway, whereas Jedi wants you to have a great life through basically dancing with it. And so unless we can see it that way, we can't move to a point where we can sit quietly with our plans and then activate and synergize and work together, because we're panicking all the time. Yeah. And most people don't believe they're panicking, but most people are panicking. Most people sit in a high state of sympathetic nervous system operation. So they're like this, but they'll be doing this. Yeah,
easily triggered.
Yeah, that's right.
The amygdala's hot.
Yeah,
and you're having those conversations with athletes. I imagine you start layering those conversations, and they probably maybe sometimes when you start working with them, they've never had that conversation.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And it's often years of work with someone to help them really find that, because they've then got to take those layers to an event, and the event becomes merely a moment in time where the universe gets to watch them to see whether they have integrity or not to be the person they said they were. But that's been happening at every gym session. It's been happening every training session. So all the medals are won, I believe, before people get to the Olympic Games. You can just look at the last 2 or 3 years leading in, especially the last year leading into Olympic Games, to look at how it's going to play out. But those medals that have won on World Championships before an Olympic Games are all won on the gym floor, and they're won in the darkness of those training sessions on the water or whatever it might be when the weather's crap in the middle of winter.
No one's watching, David.
That's right.
You said it's really important. You said, and sorry for the interruption, I just want to repeat some of the things that are so crucial in this conversation that maybe people miss, is like you don't find performance.
No.
I think that was a very important point you made. Can I ask another question? Does maturity come before courage, or does courage come before maturity? How do those two things connect?
Oh, I think they have a beautiful dance in a relationship they operate. You've got to have enough courage to make the step to actually have the experience, which then breeds the layers of, I guess, time in the saddle underneath. So, I think if you've got high maturity, you're going to have high courage.
Yeah.
And so those two will go together, because the courage will be directly related on integrity. And then for people who have deep maturity, they're prepared to put their life on the line for what's right.
Yeah.
And so that becomes even more important than the breath that they hold.
Can I ask you, this is a question I've really got. I'm really enjoying this. Who's the most psychologically mature athlete or coach that you've worked alongside?
Oh, I don't like to give names on people.
Doesn't matter.
So apologies for that. When I look across history, I see one life regret I have is not going to meet Ed. So as a teenager in New Zealand, if you'd had someone had these conversations with me when I was 18, I would have been on my car up to Auckland, and I would have taken the Auckland phone book and gone to his house with a bag of biscuits.
Yeah.
And then offered them a ginger nut just for a conversation, like make him a cuppa. And I reckon he would have had that cup of tea, researching him. There's been a couple of really powerful times where he's been asked some incredible questions that, for me, highlights exactly what I'm talking about. There's a moment in time about going to Everest, and he said, I guess we'll find out. Then they asked another question, another conversation, another interview, asked him what he thought the Melroy might have got to the summit before he did. What a stupid question to ask a magnificent man, again, when you think about maturity of a journalist to ask that question. And the transcript shows that Ed is a bit of a pause, and Ed's reply was, I always thought the goal was to get home.
Yeah.
And it's such a powerful, powerful response. And there's another one when he was talking about someone who died or passed away on the mountain, and at the expense of going for the summit, because the person was pretty well gone when they passed them on the way. And they asked Ed what he thought about that, and his response was, I always thought the most important responsibility of a human was to make the passing in another one as comfortable as possible.
Yeah.
And so he's saying the outcome never should override humanity and compassion. And so I would say Ed, for me, is the guy. Mother Teresa, haven't looked at a lot, but I loved Ed, so I've done a lot of work looking at him, and he would be the one that stands out for me as probably the gold standard of humility, the gold standard of knowing who he was, the gold standard of ability to see that he wasn't perfect, making fear his friend. And there's a beautiful place, 40 feet of sheer ice, which sits about 100 feet. I think it's only 100 feet, 100 feet from the summit of Everest. My understanding is it's called
Hillary Step.
The Hillary Step. Yeah. So when he said he was going to climb Everest, he had asked himself, what's my greatest weakness? Now, people who have egos will never ask that question. He asked that question, and he found that his greatest weakness was climbing sheer ice. So I understood that he went and climbed Mount Cook in the summer. He was a young fella then, obviously, just so that he could, the sun in the summer would thaw the ice and make it freeze again at night, and then it'd just be like climbing glass in the morning. And that's where he went and mastered the craft of climbing sheer ice. And then the Hillary Step was 40 feet of sheer ice that he and Tenzing were confronted with. And the beautiful thing about this metaphor is, if he hadn't made fear his friend, to have the maturity to ask the question, he would have got to within 100 feet of his dream. And he and Tenzing would have had to turn around, because there would have been no way to pass that Hillary Step. And obviously now these days, my understanding is there's ladders and chains and whatnot to get people up there very easily. But when he and Tenzing got there, that wasn't the case. So it's a great metaphor, and that would be so for me, he just epitomises everything that we've talked about today.
Yeah, love it. And I completely respect not naming individuals. What do you see the best coaches do differently when they see someone in their team is underperforming? What are they doing differently in your view?
They'll be checking the things that we've talked about. They'll be operating in a way to make sure that their definition of success or their expectations on themselves is growth and not performance. And obviously the layers we've talked about. And then they'll have a mindset which is, I'll catch them doing it good.
Yeah.
And they'll blow the whistle when they see them doing it right. They'll get them to bring clips of them being at their best, and they will push into the Jedi life force, rather than, because already that player's already got a overpowered limbic system operating. And the coaches don't know it that way, but that's what they're doing, is they're bringing some harmony and balance back between Jedi and Darth Vader. The Darth Vader's too powerful, so let's bring back some Jedi. The Jedi is, mate, just go out there and play. I'm going to select you whether you play terribly or not. So just you'll learn that I've trust you. I can see it in you, and in a couple of games you'll see it in yourself. And if it's a couple of seasons, don't worry, mate. I've got your back, and they're just good guardians, really.
Yeah, and I think guardians is a nice way to end it around that care that they have for their players.
Correct.
I hear that they often coach the person before they coach the player, and all true coaches care. David, last question for you, sir. I'm conscious of your time and respecting it, and I'm really, wow, we've gone deep, and I love it. Is if you had one piece of advice to give one of my rural listeners, they might be a sales manager, they might be a rural business owner, they might be a rep, he or she on the road. You might repeat something you've said here, but there's a lot to unpack here, and people might want to listen to this again because we've been through a lot. What would be your one piece of advice for them, and why, in terms of realizing their potential, making fair their friend, having that conversation with themselves, accessing or developing that maturity muscle? Because the big thing you said here in this whole conversation that really landed for me is, you've said it in a very kind way and very measured, very respectful way, is I feel society at the moment, we are maybe socializing sort of psychological immaturity. My words, not yours, my outtake, which then doesn't always, the intent's right because of safety and kindness and love and unconditional love for those that are important to you. But what would you say to someone around who maybe feels like they're listening to this, they know they're not reaching their potential, there's a voice inside them? What would you say to them?
At a foundational level is, are you doing what you love? Full stop. Because you'll never find phenomenal in a domain that you don't love. Or people might think they've found phenomenal and they'll get phenomenal performance, but they haven't found phenomenal experience. And they'll burn hot and then burn out and break down and have a nervous breakdown or something, or destroy a relationship, or end up with addictions or mental health problems. And so the irony is they never did love what they did. They did what they did because it served their ego. And the ego is fueled by play not to lose. And then that's just so related to terrible physiologically markers, psychological markers, and it's doomed. So the real challenge is you better slow down, pull over the side of the road and have a quiet reflection about whether you love what you do or not, whether you love the person you're with or not. Because if you don't, and Sigmund Freud told us that, is if you haven't got meaningful love and meaningful work, you're going to be very mentally unwell. And even though you might show the world that you're fine, you won't be in your private time.
Actually,
So I think the fundamental question is, do you love what you're doing? Do you love who you're with? If you don't, that's fine, but this is where you need to pause in your life and have a couple of hard conversations with people, which will be far better now having them now than waiting 5 years, 15 years down the track and then either blow to pieces or blow people's lives to pieces. And so the exciting thing there is if your answer is no, I don't love it, we'll change. Quite simply change. I love a message I got one day, which is, DG, I figured it out. I figured out what I want to do. And the message just said, I want to be a beekeeper. Now this person
that was Hillary, was it?
No, but there was some people. It was a very successful person, and they'd spent their life doing what they did because they thought that's what they should do.
Or they were conditioned, or
that's
social.
That's right.
Structure.
And that was a beautiful moment because they realised that that was the solution, was courage to actually let people know that, and then slowly and move a life towards a space of what they did love. And so that would be the challenge. It's a simple question, but it's a powerful and profound one. And then it doesn't have to change a life overnight. It just changes the conversation with people, and then slowly life will take its shape based on where we put our energy, and the manifestation will take shape in the physical world through that starting a conversation. So if you've got friends that are struggling, well, it's the same conversation to them. Do they love the person they're with? Do they love what they're doing? Because if they're struggling, start the conversation there. You don't need to help them fix what's going on. The courage to have that chat, we'll find our way through there beautifully. So that's the one I would use.
I love the answer. What a beautiful conversation, and particularly around that layers of who are you? What do you want? And then are you going to have integrity lived in terms of your routines, your rituals, your structure, discipline? They say overnight success takes 10 years, that moniker.
I like that.
it's so true. There's sort of instant gratification these days around shiny things, and this frenetic busyness and of super. This has been a very genuine conversation, David. I knew we were going to have a deep conversation. Awesome. Really appreciate it. Now, David, before you go, where do people find you? Where's the best place to go? We will put your. So you've got a beautiful book called Unleashing Greatness, I understand.
Yeah.
And where the website is
Habit of Greatness.
Habit of Greatness.
Yeah. And then they'll just find their way through there nicely.
Beautiful. Thank you for being such a humble, generous man. And we really appreciate your time and wisdom, David. Thank you.
Wish everyone the best. Thank you.
Hey you, hope you enjoyed this episode and you learned lots from it. It takes a wee bit of work to get these wonderful, amazing guests who are leaders in their own field on our tiny little show, who share their knowledge with you freely and generously. So it makes a lot of sense for me to ask you a tiny, tiny favour in return, which is to rate, subscribe or share the podcast or grow this YouTube channel with your family, your friends or colleagues or anyone in your network that you think will benefit from listening or subscribing to it. The reason for my request is really, really simple. I'm on an absolute mission to elevate and improve the world's perception and therefore performance of rural sales reps and rural managers like yourself, which in turn helps every rural business owner or leader on the planet. I do that by doing my very best to share the most effective sales and marketing strategies with world-class leaders and thinkers so you can get the leads, respect and sales results you deserve. But I can only do that when you help me get this channel and our podcast out to a bigger, wider audience. And the bigger the audience, the better our guests are going to be. So if you can help us with that, that would be brilliant. Now, as you know, unlike other podcasts, we don't include any of those annoying ads that interrupt your listening experience. But I would be doing a disservice if I didn't make sure that you grab a free copy of my How to Succeed in Rural Sales ebook, which would normally cost you $20 on Amazon. You get that for free as a subscriber or a podcast listener. Or you can find out more about our rural sales team training or rural sales manager training programs. You can do all of this at our resources page, which is below the video here, which is www.ruralsalessuccess.com, where you can click on and download copies of my other books here. I have another book out last year based on Ryan Halliday's brilliant book, The Daily Stoic, and it's called 365 Rules to Master Rural Sales Success. So mastering yourself, mastering rural sales, and mastering rural sales management is kind of a 3-in-1. So make sure you get that as well. And also in the notes below here, you have an access to my free new AI training tool called Field Coach IO, which can talk to you and train you 24/7, anywhere, anytime zone. No lag, no waiting. Get answers that you need right there and then for the deals that you're working on. It's got all my IP inside its knowledge base, which is extensive. 13 years of IP that you're never going to access from the likes of Chat or Claude or Gemini or Grok. And you can instantly get access at a touch of a button with no waiting. You can, it will coach you or train you on your specific live sales scenario you're facing, whether it's pricing or timing objections, existing supplier, higher authority, farmers that have ghosted you on quotes, the specific questions you need to ask to make those conversations count. It will even analyze your sales calls for you to put you right where you might be going wrong, as well as map out your territories. It syncs to Google Maps and Google My Maps, and process your export leads from CRM to prioritize which leads you need to follow up with the highly hyper-specific, customized, relevant follow-up you need to get those deals, those dead deals revived in your CRM. So whatever you need, it's going to give you immediate specific answers, and you don't need to suffer or struggle whilst you wait for answers even from me. So immediate instant coaching right there and then, just when you need it. Or even talk to you in your truck as you're about in your territory, which is awesome, as long as you've got great internet coverage. So our members and Field Coach are absolutely loving what it's doing for me. So many more use cases I could bore you with sentences here, and my development team and me are adding new tools to it all the time. So you can take Field Coach for a spin, a 15-day test drive, and try it out, see it out for yourself for just $1. The link to Field Coach is in the notes below as well. So I personally want to thank you, my friend, my dear listener and subscriber, for sharing the show with others. Really, really appreciate that, because we can make a difference. It's hard, rural sales is hard enough. Thank you for investing your time with me and my guests, because I know you're super busy. It's very busy and noisy out there. You've got many choices and options where you choose to spend and invest your very valuable, precious time. So hope it's been time well spent for you, and you've learned something from us and our guests, and it's helping you become a better rep or manager, or you as a human being. Appreciate it and appreciate you.